with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Hey, Rich, man, things have been a bit topsy-turvy. The stock market is just going, well, it's all over the place. And there's a lot of uncertainty. And, you know, the stock market, investors don't like uncertainty. The Fed, the interest rates, I mean, what's going on there? You know, that we're telegraphing higher interest rates. You know, is that a cause of concern? China tariffs. What's going to happen January 1st? What sort of disruption will that be? And I got to tell you, as an American manufacturer, already I'm being hurt very much by these tariffs. And I don't know how to invest. I don't know how to build my supply chain. And everybody's feeling that way. And I think we're starting to see that ripple through the economy. And maybe some of these good jobs numbers, you know, are at risk if we're not careful here. But someone who's been a very good friend of our show, he's come on at various times when we've had a lot of really complicated things to talk about and to get through. We're very pleased to have back with us, Stephen Moore, who's a columnist of the Washington Times, a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation, an author, has written so many things, but his latest book, just out last week, Trumponomics. You got to get that. You got to get that because, you know, what we're living right now, putting this chaos into some sort of way that we can understand it and see the method behind the madness. Stephen was there. Remember, Rich, you know, we've had him on back when President Trump was running for president. And Stephen and Larry Kudlow were working together to
Stephen gave great advice
to advise him on
the candidate. Trump did a phenomenal
how to
job
get this economy going. And
I think really
listen to him,
helped him get elected.
Look what happened the last 2 years. But are we at a crossroads? Stephen, welcome back to Made in America.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you guys, and I hope you have a great Thanksgiving.
Thanks. So tell us, Trumponomics, you know, the top three things. What is Trumponomics?
Well, it's basically putting America first. It's making sure that we put, every emphasis on helping American businesses and helping American workers, cutting taxes, reducing regulations, getting government off the back of our businesses so we can be number one in the world. And guess what, gentlemen? We are number one in the world again. It's a great feeling. Our economy really is the envy of the world. And I remember Donald Trump used to say, it'll be easy to get this done. And I used to say to him, I don't know how easy it's going to be, but he's made it look easy. I mean, we really are. Seeing an economy that's soaring. A little concerned about what happened to the stock market this week, and I think everybody is a little bit concerned about that. But I think this is a blip. I like buying the dips in the stock market because I think we're on a long-term growth path with Donald Trump at the helm.
Stephen, when you bifurcate, we have optics out there that people see, and it gets hit home all the time. Optics at the market has gone down 600 points in one day, 400 in another day, wiped out earnings for the year, although that could turn, and it does turn very, very quickly at times.
Sure. Yep.
We have the Feds doing their thing in those optics. Then we have the optics of, well, here's an example which is good in terms of America First. We're looking at Saudi Arabia. I think this president made the right call. I think on the big picture, he made the right call, what's good for America. And what are your thoughts on that? Because I think that fits into America First. The optics are one thing, the reality is another thing.
That's so true. When it comes to Saudi Arabia, this crown prince is not a good guy. But you have to ask the question of, what are you going to get as an alternative? And we're realists, and Donald Trump is a realist. He understands, this is, there are bad people in the world. There's bad countries in the world, and the Middle East is important for us from strategic and economic reasons for the United States. And he's doing what's right for American workers. He doesn't want to cancel $300 billion of contracts. He wants to make sure that we have access to their energy. And by the way, this is the reason we need to produce more American energy so we don't have to be dependent on the Middle East. He wants to make sure that Israel is safe and that Iran is not the threat that they've been. And so, this is simply a realistic approach to our foreign policy. These politicians around the world, they're not angels. I mean, point to one that's an angel. And so, I'm a realist and not an idealist. And I think Donald Trump is true, and that's the right position.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, if you talk about President Obama's getting along so well with the Iranians, you talk about people who are not angels. So you're right. I mean, that's a very good point. That's a really good point, and that is so true. And some of the African leaders who've murdered their own citizens and so on. So these people are somewhat hypocritical. But the main thing is that Trump has really put a new bounce in the step of the American economy. I love that about him. I love the fact that every decision he makes about how is this going to benefit American workers, how is it going to benefit the companies that he puts America first. That's not racist. That's not nationalistic. It's just basically good common sense. Why doesn't every president put America first? Yeah, it's crazy that you wouldn't that you would condemn patriotism, but it seems like those on the left do that these days.
Exactly, but they're not. But see, the left isn't patriotic. They believe that they don't believe in patriotism. They believe that America is a lot of them believe America is the cause of the misery in the world, rather than understanding, of course, the United States is the greatest salvation for the world, and that we've helped countries more than any other nation. So, I don't always agree with Donald Trump. You mentioned that, some of the tariffs, I think the steel tariffs have been a mistake. I think they've actually hurt our manufacturing. But on balance, I'd say 80% of the things that he's done
is there a deal, Stephen? Is there a deal on January 1st? I got to tell you, I got a lot riding on this. And, looking into your crystal ball.
You mean a deal with China?
With China, because right now, it's supposed to be 25% on January 1st and another $250 billion, perhaps.
Well, I'd love to see it, but the ball's in Beijing's court, and so far they haven't been very cooperative. And by the way, Trump is very right to pick a fight with China. Trump said it very well. We didn't start this trade war; they started it 10 years ago, and he's the first one to really recognize that we are in a trade war with China, and we better win this one. I mean, this is the dispute of our age. Right, that we may make sure that we can stand.
How does the meeting with President Trump and President Xi go in Argentina?
They just don't seem right now, the Chinese, to be wanting to make the kind of concessions that they have to make. I mean, I wish I could make a report that they're willing to make the concessions. I just don't see it. I've talked to some of my friends in the White House, and they think it's going to take some time. But look, this is a fight that Trump cannot back down here. He has got to take a very firm position with the Chinese, and he will. And say this is a good time to be, having this fight with China, because we have a booming economy and their economy is actually faltering, and their stock market's taken a big hit. So, look, in the end, I think Trump will prevail. How long this takes, Neil, I don't know. It might take a year or so before China finally makes the kind of concessions they need to make so that we have a fair and even-handed arrangement. I mean, they're stealing $300 billion a year from us. $300 billion of our intellectual property. I mean, that's not free trade.
I totally agree with that in terms of free trade or fair trade, as Trump likes to use fair trade. But, right. Does he here's what concerns me. I think you're right. I think Trump's concept, looking out down the road, we have to hold steady, keep the course, and get what we need out of this. Will he be able to cut a deal? Will he be able to not get 100% of what he wants? And will he survive that?
Well, yeah, I think this is right. And look, Trump has gotten concessions already from Canada, from Mexico. It looks like he's going to get some concessions from the Brits and Europeans. So I think his trade strategy, it's a little bit risky, but I think in the end it's paying off. And, as I say in my book, Trumponomics, wouldn't it be something if this president was the one who actually expanded free trade around the world by getting other countries to reduce their trade barriers? I mean, Trump said this in his speech last week. He said, I'm using these tariffs as a negotiating tactic to get other countries to behave themselves. And let's face it, the other countries, every country that we negotiate with has higher tariffs than we do. They're not playing by the rules.
Yeah, I mean, all valid points. Well, let's talk about interest rates real quick in the time we have. What are your thoughts about the Fed?
I think Trump is 100% correct. The Fed has tried to take this punch bowl away from this party just as Trump has got it going. And there's no case for higher interest rates. If you look what happens to the price of oil, look what's happened to the price of commodities. They've been falling. That's completely inconsistent with an inflation scenario. There's very little inflation in the economy right now. The Fed is afraid of growth. They're afraid of wage increases. We want growth. We want wage increases. And so I think the Fed should stop raising rates, and they should make an announcement that they're not going to be raising rates next year. If they do that, they will keep the juice that's going on in the economy. So I'm very much in favor of of the Fed keeping inflation under control, but growth does not cause inflation, right? Growth does not cause inflation. Too much money causes inflation.
Interesting. Hey, Stephen, thanks for being on the show. I know you're very busy. Thanks for carving a few minutes out for Rich and I.
Yeah.
We really love having you with us. Have a great rest of your day. Happy Thanksgiving, and we'll talk to you soon.
Wish you the best.
You too.
Stephen Moore, the author of Trumponomics, and columnist of the Washington Times and senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and many, many other things. Don't leave us right now, because Rich and I are going to be back in a moment with some really interesting things to discuss.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Rich, Stephen is a very brilliant man, an economist, has had so many different things that he's written. His latest book, Trumponomics, is out right now. And he was there at the beginning, right? He was there when President Trump was running, together with Larry Kudlow, and helped to design a lot of the policies that we're benefiting from today.
Yeah, well, he and Kudlow were the authors of the economic policy that he espoused back in that September before the election at the New York Economic Club. And that speech pushed him over dramatically. When people finally gelled in their brain, they said, no, I get it. I understand what he's trying to do. And they helped create the pathway for his success on November 6th.
But what I think that he's underestimating, and I think he's understating, what's happening in the volatility that we see in the stock market right now.
Well, what I'm concerned with,
and it's not all rosy here.
No, it is not rosy. That's why there are optics, and then there's reality. There's Trump's vision, and it's a longer-term vision, because he's looking out for where we're going to be and what we have to do. And I think he's right in what he's trying to do long term. Here's what I'm worried about. And this is what I was trying to get at with Stephen, but we kind of ran out of time, so I let it go. But Trump's vision, I think, is correct. It's going to take time to get there. Can he weather the course? Because he will be beaten along the way, both by the media, other economic people in the country, talking heads around the country. But
Rich,
can he survive that?
But Rich, he's the one who's rating his presidency or tying his presidency and his success as a president to the stock market. He's always doing that. So if you live by the sword, you die by the sword.
Well,
and if the market's going up, he's very quick to take credit for that. But if the market's going down, well, that's also a barometer that he set himself. He said himself that I'm the president that is going to grow the wealth of this country. And look at your 401ks, look at your retirement programs. What was it? Just after he got elected a few months later, he said, how am I doing? Well, look at your retirement funds right now, and you tell me how I'm doing. Because he knows that a lot of the people who on fixed incomes, or retirement, and so forth, that they depend on their portfolios in order to survive, have done very well underneath him. But we know now that is starting to erode. We're starting to see the cracks there. So why is that? And I believe the China trade situation is a big part of it, because, what was it? Ford the other day made an announcement that the cost of building cars in America for Ford is up $1 billion. $1 billion more to make cars. Now, can they pass that along? What happens is the consumers now don't show up in the showrooms to buy cars because now they're just a little bit out of reach. So, and I think that you're going to start to see, and I think that's what you're seeing. And you see, the stock market, they're always forward pricing things. It's not like it happens.
They factor in what's happening now and where it's going to take it.
Right, and I think that's why you see the volatility, is that they're factoring in this uncertainty right now. The market's uncertain. Instead of this big rip roar of a hockey stick of an incline in the marketplace, we're starting to see that being given back. We're giving that back now. We're giving that back. And I think that's a very big psychological thing for this president, is seeing his stock market getting slaughtered.
Well, I would think I'd like to be a fly in the wall when he's discussing it, because you're right. I mean, if in fact he based everything on that, and it was a very, very big push. It was all his rallies. They were doing the best, the biggest, the most wonderful, in 9 years, 10 years, most growth ever in the United States. I'm not knocking that. I don't want you to people hear the sarcasm and facetiousness in what I'm saying. I embrace all of that. But it does seem strange that we are now defending, what we weren't defending 6 weeks ago. So things have really changed. I am very concerned that this president must stay the course. And I would like to hear and how he feels he can turn this around.
Yeah. And so I hope that when President Trump meets the Chinese president, that they'll find a way to compromise, in the same way that I hope that he and Nancy Pelosi will find a way to compromise, and they'll find things to be able to work on. Maybe that's going to happen. Hey, look, I was encouraged the other day. I seen there's a group of Democrat congressmen and women that have put together agendas saying, here's the things we want to accomplish. And it was all very good stuff. It was all good. We want infrastructure. We want prison reform. I think that's a good thing to take up. We want cheaper prescription drug prices. We want to figure that out. We want to fix health care. We want to keep Obamacare, but we want to improve upon it. But there seemed to me to be a lot of area of agreement and things that, all good people should be able to come together and agree upon. It just doesn't make sense that we're constantly fighting. And I also believe that, the Democrats got to be careful here, because they won some districts that are very conservative, or at least leaning conservative, by a couple of hundred votes. I mean, those will be right back in Republican control if they start jumping off the cliff, with the very liberal part of their party. And unfortunately, that's what's going to happen, because the big vocal people in the Democrat Party are going to bring them there and are going to hold hands as they jump off the cliff together. And then you'll see, election in for Trump. I'm sure he'll play very big on that. Very interesting times, Rich.
Well, it's very interesting times, and I find it interesting that, the Democrats are going to come up with an idea that, we could work on this, and we can do infrastructure, and we can do Obamacare, or health care, rather, and we can do, other things that are great. But the question is, why haven't they done it, and why have led this country to such a divisive environment? And it really concerns me. So I guess the proof will be in what they do, and that will unfold starting January.
And you talk about divisiveness. How about the press briefings? Coming up right now, you don't want to miss it. John Carlson, former deputy press secretary to both Presidents Nixon and Ford, going to talk about the state of the press briefings in this country. You don't want to miss this.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neal Asbury's Made in America.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffin. Hey, Rich, this is flashback. I remember as a kid growing up, I was a senior in high school. And I was a janitor. at Picatinny Arsenal in New Jersey.
Oh, my God, I know Picatinny. Used to hear them, exploding things when I was at camp in Mount Freedom.
Oh, well, very good. Picatinny Arsenal. And,
sure.
It's an armaments research and development
exactly
command, and a lot of very restricted places in there, and places that you
the word
can't go.
Bang comes to mention right now, just thinking about that.
And I actually, as a student, I was a janitor there, and I remember very clearly. And everybody was gone, and a guy who was a draftsman. They were draftsmen. There was no computers back then, and drafting whatever bombs they were making all the drawings. And he had a really nice radio, right? And I would go to that radio, and I would just crank it up and listen to music as I'm sweeping the floors and emptying the trash cans. And I remember very clearly the day that President Nixon resigned. And, I was sweeping the floor, and there it was, and it was on the radio, and it was an amazing thing, trying to figure out as a senior in high school what this really meant. And now you kind of flash forward, and, it was very nasty back then. But I still don't think it's anywhere near what it is that we have today. I mean, I just don't. And things have really gone off the rails here, and it's just got to be different. We just got to come together. We just can't be like that. I see all the shouting and grabbing of mics and people who are just not polite. And hey, look, it's the president of the United States. There's got to be respect for that office.
I think that's exactly correct. I think two words you just used that stand out. Number one, polite, and number two, respect. That doesn't exist anymore. Right. And I think it's very, very wrong for us to see people attack our president at the press, shouting at him, people not returning microphones, people humiliating Sarah Saunders, the press secretary. All of this is destructive, ultimately destructive. I don't think it accomplishes anything except for the sycophants who is stuck on the far left side. But it doesn't do anything for the country.
Yeah, as living in Asia, and I visited Taiwan all the time, and they would actually have fistfights break out in the Taiwanese.
Oh, no, I would see that.
You see all of that?
They beat each other up in their Congress or something.
Yeah,
it's horrible.
Are we getting there? I mean, I watched it. Are we getting there?
You would think you would be in the New York subway. I mean, that you get to see that.
Are we getting there?
Yeah.
Hey, we're very pleased to have someone on who was back there with President Nixon. Actually, he's the former deputy press secretary for both President Nixon and President Ford.
Very powerful man.
Very pleased to have, and very insightful. We're very pleased to have John Carlson with us right now. Hey, John, welcome to Made in America.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So tell us, you were there. You were there back then. I mean, these were some very, very difficult times for our country, and it was a lot of stuff going on, and it was very emotional. It was very intense. But how would you compare what you witnessed as deputy press secretary to President Nixon? Obviously, there was
and there was a lot of vitriol against Nixon. I mean, it's not an easy time.
That must have been very tough. And then President Ford, who had to try to get the country healed again. And you were there. And now you see what's going on in our country today. What kind of comparison would you draw?
Well, with Jim Acosta, what a piece of work. I think he's an embarrassment to the press corps. And interestingly, on Election Day, November 6th, I was in New York City and took the train down to D.C. I met Ron Nessen for lunch. Remember Ron Nessen? NBC
Sure.
newsman, press secretary for Ford.
Right. Yeah.
And we met for lunch at the National Press Club and mingled with, a couple dozen press corps members, and all on background, of course. But they're frustrated. They're saying that Acosta is a showboater. He's just trying to get his face on TV, self-promoting. They're embarrassed by him. And Ron Nessen and I looked back and joked that we thought it was difficult when we were briefing the press. We actually briefed twice a day. But it was much easier in our day because, first of all, the press corps was much smaller, less people accredited to cover the press briefings and the press conferences. And secondly, there was no TV coverage. So people weren't grandstanding all the time. So it was a different world. But it seems to me there's an easy solution to it. And I kind of blame the White House press office because all you have to do is tell the press corps, I would think, that because we have so many accredited members of the press wanting to come into the briefing room and to the press conferences every day, that each member can only ask one question, not a three-part question, 3 follow-ups, etc. Give everybody a chance. It seems like that would be an easy way to go.
Well, you know what I find interesting, John, and I do remember those days. And I want to take it back a little bit farther and go back to JFK. And when JFK had a press conference, everybody wanted to listen to the press conference because it was such a communal feeling between the press corps, whether they were left or right, and the president. And there was such a great respect for it. I do find it astounding that the rest of the press corps, John, today with Acosta, have lost that communal feeling in the sense that, listen, you're an embarrassment to us, and you're impeding us from doing our job. So, I mean, do you think the press corps should have taken a larger stand, a stronger stand against Jim Acosta?
Well, you're so right. What they told me privately, I wish they would say publicly.
Well, that's the problem.
Right on. And, those seats in the press briefing room and at the press conferences are signed by the White House press Correspondents Association, so that CNN and networks and so forth get the major seats right in front. And so one thought is for Trump not to call on Acosta, but that's difficult when he's sitting 2 feet from you, screaming and hollering. During my day with Nixon and Ford, we had guys like Dan Rather who were pretty obnoxious. Remember Sam Donaldson?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. What an attitude.
Crazy eyes.
Yeah.
And eyebrows.
Eyebrows. I think he was Satan. I'm convinced.
But he was politely obnoxious. And it's a different world now.
Yeah. Hey, John, we're going to have to take a short break. We're listening to John Carlson, who's the former deputy press secretary for both President Nixon and President Ford, and we're just having a wonderful conversation about where we are in this country today and what to expect in the future. You don't want to miss this. John is going to be back with us in just a moment.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. And we have with us today John Carlson, the former deputy press secretary to both President Nixon and President Ford. So, John, before we move on, maybe to how you read the midterms, just a quick question: how can a judge insist who's in a press briefing? Right? I just don't get that. I mean, there has to be the president and the president's office has to have some sort of control on who's in that room, right? I mean, how can a judge just say, no, this person is going to be there despite, rude and obnoxious and even pushing people around and blah, 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 not playing by the rules, so on. How can a judge get involved in that?
Neal, I agree with you completely. I say the same thing when these judges in San Francisco and Hawaii say we can't close the border. We got to let everybody in. I don't know where the judges are coming from, but the Ninth Circuit, some of these judges are pretty liberal and pretty far out, I think.
Well, I think that's 100% correct, and I think the president, labeled, actually didn't label. He used it in the context of his sentence that this was an Obama judge, which it was. He was placed there by Obama. He was positioned by Obama. But what I find interesting, John, is that the basis for the Acosta thing, they said that it was infringing upon his First and Fifth Amendment rights. I don't even understand how that's infringing on his First Amendment right, because he can write anything he wants to write. He can still cover the White House. He just lost his permission because he's a bad boy going into the press corps environment at the other thing. And I didn't even understand the Fifth Amendment.
But the Constitution doesn't give a right to every American to go to a press briefing.
Right, exactly. John, I mean, when you think about it, I mean, do you think Ford or Nixon what would Nixon have done? Now, Nixon had some vitriolic people coming after him, but I don't remember the press sniping that way, and he had some pretty tough words to say about the press occasionally too.
Well, you said it so well when you started off this segment that in the old days there was politeness and respect of the presidency. That's gone now. It's gone. Unfortunately.
Yeah. So sad. So tell us, John, here we go. We just had some midterms. I guess both sides are claiming some sort of victory. Of course, the mainstream media is, talking about, the great takeover of the House. And, of course, then on the conservative side, President Trump did expand his majority in the Senate. So kind of a split decision. And, the thing that the thing that I see is that in many of these districts that the Democrats won and flipped, they did so with very, very middle of the road, even conservative Democrats, not like your very liberal Democrats. So now they get elected, and it's kind of like everybody in the mainstream media saying, "Oh, the Democrats won," and that's a validation that we're going to go way left and go with these really crazy, really super out there leftist policies. But that's not what these people voted for, who voted for these Democrats. So they're going to be right back in the minority if they let this majority get overtaken by these people who are going to take the Democrat Party off the cliff here, including California. I mean, I see that, they swept Orange County, but they didn't do it by much. And if they go super left, are they going to be able to keep those seats?
Excellent points. The Democrats, I think, needed 23 seats for majority, and then they got, 37, 38. So they can crow about this. But if you look back, the Republicans' answer to that is we lost, 37 or 38 House seats. Clinton in 1994 lost 54 House seats. Obama in 2010 midterm lost 63 seats. So it wasn't a complete wipeout. Thank God we kept the Senate and actually gained a seat or two. But Neal and Rich, I got briefed back there in Washington. That's the reason I was back in Washington the day after the election. And the trend is not good. We always lose the major cities, Dallas, Houston, Chicago, Denver, on and on. We lose them, but we win the suburbs. In 2018, we lost the suburbs. Gingrich House seat, he first won in 1978. It's been in Republican hands for 40 years. We lost that seat, and on and on. So it's going to be a difficult couple of years coming up. I think you made an excellent point that maybe if the Democrats overplay their hand, we'll give back the majority in 2020.
Well, I think if they overplay the hand, that's part of the compost.
I don't think there's any question that they're overplaying their hand.
Well, no, they will. I get that.
Investigation after investigation.
Here's my question: if in fact, now think about this, because this is where I have a disconnect. If the economy was doing so well, and it is, and people are making more money, and there are more jobs than there are unemployed right now, this is wonderful. You want a job, you find a job in this country right now. If we have fewer people on welfare, if we have highest employment for blacks, highest employment for women, highest employment for Hispanics, how could we have lost so many seats? How could we have lost so many governorships? That's what worries me. Did America not get the message? America
is torn right now. I think, I hate to say this, but Trump is very divisive. And the good news comes out. For example, we would plan several days in advance in the White House what we wanted to be the major news story the next day, 2 days from now, what we want to be the headline on the evening news, what we want to be the front page story of the New York Times. We'd plan that. And for example, Trump, people plan it, unemployment lowest in 50 years. That comes out, and then Trump says something like, Sessions is an idiot. And that takes all the good news off the screen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We've been listening to John Carlson, former deputy press secretary for both President Nixon and President Ford, on a much, much more polite and respectful period of our country. Hopefully we can get that back. I don't see it happening soon. John, thanks for being with us. We really enjoyed having you.
Great. Thank you, and happy Thanksgiving.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I are going to have some final thoughts for the day.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Hey, Rich, it's great to have a little trip down memory lane with John Carlson, a very great American. I just can't imagine. It was fascinating to me when he was talking about, well, the job of the press secretary is to decide, 2 weeks, 3 weeks in advance what's going to be on the evening news, what's going to be the headline in the newspaper, and to manage towards that and to keep the narrative. But then you have President Trump out there, just going by the seat of his pants, saying this or saying that or saying whatever. And his press people are losing the narrative. They're losing the narrative. How much of that is the ultra uber liberal media? I'm sure a lot of it is. How much of it is self-inflicted? It's a good topic to debate.
Well, I think when we talk that way, Neal, it sounds like that we're equating that it's a fairness, that the Trump's reaction is on the same level of what the Democrats, or the left, I should say, are doing to his administration, and I don't see it that way. I think this president is under attack constantly, 24/7. I mean, occasionally I watch, of course I have to take, some drugs to watch MSNBC, but something soporific, but to calm me down so I don't have a heart attack watching. But I have to tell you, I have never in my life seen a president under such attack constantly that even if there's a good story, it becomes a bad story. Even if there's a statement that, we're improving people, but it's racist. Or, we're trying to save this country. I mean, the one thing that we're supposed to do as a president is to protect the borders of the country and the integrity and the safety and the security of the United States. But if he does that, then he's a racist, a homophobe, and all these other horrible things that they say about him that are out there. So they kind of set him up, given the type of person that he is. But I have to tell you, I can't see that they say, well, there are bad things on both sides. No, I don't buy it that way. That's their narrative. I don't buy into their narrative for a second. I buy into the narrative that they are attacking constantly on multiple levels, whether it's going to be in the stock market, whether it's going to be on the news, whether it's going to be in the streets, whether it's going to be on the border. I mean, when you come out with a statement like Kamala Harris said the other day, she compared the Border Patrol and ICE to the KKK. And browbeat the guy from the Border Patrol and ICE into saying, well, the perception is that you're nothing more than the KKK. People look comparing, and he says, I don't buy into that. He said, no. Do you understand that it's a perception? Do you understand? And she browbeat him. When you have that, and people are grandstanding, Neil, on these issues that are so jaded that I find it very hard for the president not to get frustrated and come out and snap. Now, does he do that? Yes. Is that the type of person he is? Sure. He's been doing that since day one, since he was a candidate. He tweeted and tweeted and tweeted. And I guess he tweeted because he couldn't get his words out because they won't carry them. So I find it very, very frustrating. Even if we have a good narrative, you can't get that narrative out. I mean, look at the press corps, the dinner, the annual, hosting and roasting from the press corps to the White House administration.
And they're not going to have a comedian this year.
Well, I would hope not.
Yeah.
Look what they did to Sarah Saunders. They so humiliated Sarah Saunders, which was so horrible to watch, that how could you find humor in that? That's not humor. I'm sorry. I know humor. I'm a comedian. I know that's not humor. That's outrageous grandstanding and humiliation of another person with complete lack of respect. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how they get the narrative out and how we're supposed to move forward. Because after all, the big push that Nancy Pelosi said, thank you, America, for voting us in because we're saving America. Saving America from what? I thought we were saving America and we got the Democrats out because they were killing America. And the reality of it is they're saving America. Neil, I don't buy into that at all.
Yeah. I mean, all very valid points. That's why I started off by saying a trip down memory lane. I mean, things seemed to be much simpler back then. And it just seemed like, yes, we had our differences, but we talked about them in a very different way. And we debated them in a very different way.
We talked about it in an arena that was established to have these conversations. But we're not having our conversations anymore. We're having browbeating. We're yelling at each other. And you can't accomplish anything that way. I don't have high hopes on that. I really don't. It's worrying me.
Very troublesome.
And my dog. Bogart's very nervous.
Hey, but we're out of time, Rich. Unfortunately, this incredible show today has got to come to an end. But don't worry, we're going to be back again next week for another adventure at the same time of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.